Welcome. I am Tanya Lamo, the Dare County Extension Director and Horticulture Agent. Thank you for joining us today through this series of Ice to Grow By. Each month, we'll dig into the many facets of the wonderful, wild world of horticulture. So whether you're a novice plant collector or if your thumb is already bright green, join us as we share information and resources to expand your skills and knowledge, from understanding plant basics, growing and gardening tips, to knowing what plants work best in your landscape. Every month, we'll water your plant and garden knowledge. Just a bit about North Carolina State Extension. We extend research-based knowledge to all North Carolinians, helping them transform science into everyday solutions that improve their lives and grow our state. So is it possible that we are already into the month of September? It's hard to believe, but this is the perfect time of year to begin preparing your lawn and landscape for the winter months ahead by conducting some preventative maintenance so you can have successful lawns and landscapes next year. Today we're going to touch on 3 specific topics related to fall lawn and garden preparation. We're going to cover some information about turf grass and how to control your weeds and weed management, and then we're going to discuss a little bit about how to prepare your landscape beds for the upcoming winter months. So there are a couple reasons that make fall an ideal time to get your turf grass established. Many people ask, why should I plant grass in the fall? Well, the number one reason to plant turf in the fall is there's less watering required. There are fewer high-temperature days during the fall months, which require less watering in order for you to get your lawn established. Also, another great reason to plant turf in the fall is because the soil temperatures are still warm, and this equals excellent root growth. Building a strong root system for your turf creates a stronger turf for the spring and summer months. And with the soil being warm still through the fall, you are able to do this quite well. Another great reason to plant turf in the fall is because the weed pressure is much lower. You won't be focusing as much on weed control, and you'll be able to get that turf established in a thick, strong grass, which will set you up to be able to outcompete the weeds in the spring and summer months ahead. So if you're thinking about establishing new turf, you want to be aware that you will most likely be installing sod if you're planting in the fall. A good rule of thumb is spring is the time to plant seeds and plugs, so anytime through March through June is when you would be seeding your lawn, and then anytime March through October, sod will perform better for you. Now, there can be more expense with laying sod initially, but you may struggle less with maintenance in the future and weed control and lawn establishment. So you'll need to weigh your options to determine what is the best choice for you. Another good rule of thumb is to always have a soil test done, and we offer these at the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Office, so just contact us if you're interested in getting a soil test. But good soil preparation is essential for having your lawn established well. Anytime you're doing a new planting installation, we recommend this, and then it will guide you on how you cultivate your soil and add your nutrients. And then you'll also want to be sure that you're leveling the planting area to be sure that the sod or the grass that you're laying has good contact with the soil. Also, once your turf is planted, you will want to have a rule of thumb to water about 2 to 3 times a day for 5 to 15 minutes for the first 2 to 3 weeks. And you want to also not apply any herbicides until you have mowed your turf at least 3 times. And this will all be dependent on the type of turf grass that you choose. So which turf grass is right for you? Well, you can see here on this map that Dare County is located in the coastal plain. And so we are really recommending that you plant a warm season grass. And while warm season grasses that we're going to be talking about are recommended for the coastal plain, we do still have some additional growing conditions in Dare County that can make growing turf a bit more challenging. So again, you want to consider what is the intended use of your area? How much traffic will be walking over the lawn or the turf that you're thinking about planting? Also consider the desired appearance. And then your specific growing conditions. Is your yard in full sun? Is it part shade? Does it get really wet? Is it super dry? And do you have salt exposure? These are all factors you need to consider when you're choosing a grass. So the different warm season varieties that we're going to be talking about today are Bermuda grass, centipede grass, zoysia grass, and St. Augustine. And just because these grasses are suggested that they can do well in the Outer Banks doesn't mean that they come maintenance free. All of them have different nutrient requirements, growth rates, weed management strategies, and appearance. So it's important to do your research to know what you would like and what would work best in your yard. So we're going to start off with Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass is a fine to medium thick texture, and it has a narrow blade. Its color is generally gray-green to blue-green in color, and it can spread really quickly by stolons and rhizomes. So this spreads above the ground and below the ground. One thing to note about this is while it will fill in your area and your yard quite quickly, if you have flower beds or vegetable gardens or a landscape border, it will quickly spread into those areas as well. So having a plan for edging is very important when you're considering Bermuda grass. It is very wear tolerant. It has excellence in that, and it's also high drought tolerant, and it also is very tolerant of high salt spray. So Bermuda grass prefers full sun and it is not shade tolerant. So this is something to take into consideration if you have a beautiful live oak tree or a nice stand of pines, or if you have some large growing shrubs or like a crepe myrtle or hydrangea area, you might notice that if you install Bermuda grass that those areas won't fill in quite as quickly or if at all. So you'll want to consider that when evaluating your lawn choices. It also has a fairly high maintenance schedule of mowing twice a week at 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches, and it does require 4 treatments of nitrogen a year. Another grass to consider is zoysia grass. Zoysia grass has a fine to medium texture. It's a darker green in color, so it often is very attractive. It also spreads quickly through stolons and rhizomes, and it is very dense, and it remains really beautiful. It is very wear resistant and very drought tolerant. One thing to note is as the year moves along, it goes dormant in the wintertime, so it's not always as attractive during those winter months. It does prefer full sun, but will tolerate shade, and because it's so thick, it can become fatchy if it's over-fertilized or not mowed frequently enough. And most of these varieties are established through sod, so if you're considering this is a great time of year to plant this. There are 2 varieties known that can be seeded, which are Zenith and Companion. And if you chose to seed them, you would want to do that in the spring months. And this has a little bit less of a nitrogen requirement. It's 2 to 3 times a year, so there's a little bit less cost and maintenance with applying fertilizer for zoysia grass. St. Augustine grass is another warm season grass, and this is the broadest blade grass. It has a really coarse texture. It's a medium green in color, and it spreads by stolons, so only above the ground. It is not very wear tolerant, so if you have a high traffic area or if you have a lot of equipment that runs over that part of the yard, you may not want to consider St. Augustine. It does grow very quickly in the summer, and it is very tolerant of high salt spray. St. Augustine grass is probably the most tolerant of turf grasses, and its mowing height is a little bit higher as well. It is 2 to 3 inches you can mow this to. And you do need to mow it frequently to prevent thatch, but this must be sodded or plugged. So if you're sodding it, you would do that in the fall here, or if you were going to install plugs, you would want to do that in the spring. Centipede grass is the last grass we're going to be talking about today. This is a really coarse textured grass, and it's a medium green. It spreads really slowly by stolons, so again, just above the ground. It has a low wear tolerance, so again, consider this if it's a really actively used area, you might not want to choose centipede as your turf. It's very slow growing, and it prefers an acidic soil. Some things to note about centipede grass: it can tolerate light shade, but it does prefer full sun, and it can be very sensitive to herbicides. So if you're treating a bed for weeds that's next door, right beside it, and you have drift or overspray, you might see the results of dead patches in your yard because of that. Centipede grass can be established by seed or with sod, and a few varieties are established by plug. And this has a mowing height recommendation of 1 to 2 inches, and it only requires 1 nitrogen fertilizing a year. So it's a lot less cost as far as fertilizer is concerned, and less maintenance. But if you establish this by seed, one thing to note is that it can take 2 to 3 years to really get it fully established, which can open up that area to be very susceptible to weeds. So you need to consider that as well when you're choosing your turf. And that leads me right into weed management, maintaining your weeds. How you treat your weeds really depends on your turf grass. So proper turf management is important for biennial broadleaf weed control. You need to maintain a dense, actively growing turf through proper mowing, fertilizing, and watering practices. Mowing at the proper height for your selected turf grass can make a huge difference in your weed management. So when you should treat your weeds is up to the type of turf that you have and the type of weeds that you're battling. Most weeds are seasonal, and they have specific times of the year in which they can be treated. Most folks use a pre- or post-emergent herbicide. Some of these are labeled for both uses, but oftentimes they're most effective for either pre-emergent or post-emergent. And treating weeds at the wrong time of the year can add an extra expense, and you might not see any positive results as a result of it, and then you're adding more chemicals to the environment and into your lawn. So anytime you are applying a herbicide or a pesticide, you must read the label to make sure you're using it correctly for your lawn and landscape. Follow the directions to be sure you and the environment remain safe. So let's talk about a couple of these weeds that we might see here in Dare County. Gray cudweed is a cool season annual, and this forms a basal rosette when it's young. So you'll notice there's like a swirl of leaves that go around a center point. The underside of the leaves of this plant are grayish in appearance, and they are woolly or kind of fuzzy to the touch. This can be treated with atrazine in all warm season varieties. So all the grasses we talked about, you can safely apply atrazine to help control this weed, and it can be used as a pre or post-emergent control. Florida Betony is another weed that plagues many of us. It is very hard to control. It's a perennial weed, and it emerges in the fall and becomes a problem in the late winter and in the spring. It's easily recognized by the very characteristic white tuber, or like a thick root that resembles a rattlesnake rattle. Often too, when I'm in the garden and digging up plants, I might think it's a Japanese beetle grub because it almost looks like a grub as well. This weed also has a notable characteristic of a square stem, and it produces white to pink flowers in the spring on a stalk. To control this, you can use atrazine as a pre-emergent in your turf and in your lawn and landscape. Annual bluegrass is another weed that you may be familiar with. It's cool season, and again, it's most noticeable in the spring in the warm season lawns. Annual bluegrass means that it germinates in the fall, even though you do not see it. So the pictures I have here on the slides are annual bluegrass in the spring when it's flowering, and that's when it forms its seeds. But the seeds remain dormant until the fall, and then they begin to germinate, and then you'll notice these patches, these white fluffy patches in your yard in the spring months. To control this, use an herbicide control of atrazine, and that's safe to use on all warm season turf varieties. And then the other weed I'm going to talk about is common chickweed. This is a low-spreading winter annual or perennial weed, and it has a really weak, shallow root system. This forms dense mats that are low growing in early August, so you might even still see remnants of this around your yard if you had it growing in your yard. It has an indistinct white flower. It is very easy to pull manually, so if your patch of this hasn't gotten too out of control, I would recommend trying to remove this manually because it does pull out quite easily. And it does thrive under shaded areas that might have a lot of moisture, and that encourages them to grow. So as I mentioned, some of the turf we talked about did not do well in shade, like the Bermuda grass. So if you have an area that you're trying to establish Bermuda grass, for example, and it's not thriving in those shady spots, common chickweed could be something that could come in and take over just because your grass isn't out competing the weeds. And this, if you want to use a chemical control with this, you may also use atrazine as a control method for this if it's too much to remove by hand. So just remember, how you treat your weeds should depend on the type of grass you have. There really isn't a blanket answer, but making sure that your lawn is healthy and thick and that you're using the proper mowing schedule for it will be your best defense against weeds. So you can also apply potassium to your applications, and this will be determined by your soil test. But you really don't want to fertilize with nitrogen in the fall. And the reason for this is because it can increase the weed and disease pressure, so it can encourage those weeds to grow, making it more of a struggle for your grass to fill in those areas. And it can also send mixed signals to the plants, and it can also cause your lawn to be more susceptible to winter kill. So just take that into consideration when you are building your fertilizer schedule. So now we're going to talk about a landscape bed fall preparation and what you can do to make sure that your landscape beds, your borders, and your hedges all come back great and great shape for the next year. One thing you want to do is remove any diseased plant materials. So if you have hydrangeas or trees that you notice have some pests or pathogens or a disease showing up on a branch, it's best recommended to remove that and dispose of it. Also clean up the litter from the base of trees, especially if there is a diseased or infested branch on there, because those leaves at the base of the tree or the shrub will harbor that disease. And then when the time is right, they are right there to hatch and attack the host plant again for the next season. So good cleanup is really important when you're working in your gardens this fall. And mulching. If you have nice healthy trees and you have a nice pile of leaves raked up, you can use mulch these leaves to use as a compost on your turf grass or around your landscape trees and shrubs. And then adding mulch to your gardens is a great way to prepare them for fall. Just a word about mulch. There are many different types of mulches, and they come in many different varieties, colors, and textures. The hardwood mulch is good for weed suppression, moisture retention, and it breaks down slowly. So it's a good investment, and sometimes you can even get more than 1 year out of this if it doesn't break down very fast. A softwood or pine mulch is good for weed control. One thing to note, it can have large nuggets that may float in water. So if you have a flower bed or a landscaped area that gets standing water in it, sometimes this might not be the best selection for you. And then pine straw is excellent for adding as an insulation layer to protect tree roots. One thing to note though is that it is highly flammable, so avoid overusing this near your homes because it has that high flammability rating and you don't want to have something that can spark really easily close to your house. Plastic is another great use of mulch. It's a great weed suppressor and it retains moisture very well. It is slow to break down, so consider this. If you have plans to expand your landscape area or your flower bed, it can become a little bit challenging to work around or through, and it can be a little bit more expensive than your typical hardwood or softwood mulches. And then stone, gravel, and volcanic rock are also used for foundation plants. They serve as a great way to create a barrier for weeds. They're very permanent, or they take a lot of back muscle to move if you do decide to change your mind. They can solarize the soil, so depending on the rock and what you have planted within there, it can get too warm for the plants. So do consider that when you're thinking about which mulch you might choose. And that's everything I have for today related to how to prepare your lawn and landscape for the fall and winter months ahead. I do want to point you to some extra resources that you may find at the Dare County Cooperative Extension website. Here we have resources, programs and events listed, along with a way to connect with the Dare County Extension Master Gardeners. And if you'd like to meet with the Extension Master Gardeners in person, they are at the Manio office on Budley Street every other Monday. And then also every Wednesday, they are at the Outer Banks Arboretum up in Kill Devil Hills. So if you have a plant question or you want to bring in a sample, please feel free to stop by and visit with our Extension Master Gardeners. And then the North Carolina Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox is an excellent resource that contains detailed descriptions and photographs of over 4,500 plants that grow in and around North Carolina. And it's a wonderful way to learn about the different plants that grow here, how to find natives, learn what plants attract wildlife and pollinators. It's a fantastic resource. And then just here's a list of some of the resources I used to put together this presentation. And I want to give a shout out to one of my colleagues, Sam Marshall, who's with Extension in Haywood County, for sharing this presentation with me. It was very beneficial in helping me put this together. So I thank you for joining us. And next month in October, we will talk about putting bulbs in your yards for spring blooms. Thank you.